Let me tell you something real, because when someone starts distancing himself, the worst thing you can do is panic. Panic makes you chase. Panic makes you overtalk. Panic makes you explain your worth to somebody who should already see it. And the moment you start explaining your value, you start losing leverage. When a man pulls back, it doesn't always mean he doesn't care. Sometimes it means he's overwhelmed. Sometimes it means he's unsure. And sometimes it means he's trying to figure out what he really feels. But here's the truth: most people don't want to hear what you do next determines everything. Let me tell you something you really need to understand, because this right here changes how you see everything. When he starts distancing himself, your first instinct is to assume he doesn't care anymore. Your mind goes straight to rejection, abandonment, or replacement, but most of the time, distance is not a lack of feeling, it's confusion. A man can feel deeply and still pull back. A man can care and still not know what to do with those feelings. And that confusion scares him more than the feelings themselves. See, men are not taught how to process emotions the way you are. When something hits him deeply, when attachment starts to feel real, when responsibility starts to show up, his instinct isn't always to lean in. Sometimes his instinct is to retreat so he can think, so he can breathe, so he can figure out whether he's ready for what he's feeling. That distance is not always about you doing something wrong. Sometimes it's about him realizing this is real and not knowing if he's strong enough to handle it. Here's where people mess it up. They see confusion and they try to fix it. They explain more, they give more, they show more effort. But confusion doesn't need more noise, it needs space. When you keep talking, texting, checking in, and asking what's wrong, you don't give his mind room to settle. You actually increase the pressure, and pressure makes a confused man pull back even further. When you understand that distance can come from emotional overload, your reaction changes. You stop taking it personally. You stop begging for reassurance. You stop questioning your worth. You realize this is his internal battle, not your failure. And that awareness alone gives you power. Because the moment you stop reacting from fear, you stop feeding the confusion. A man figures out his feelings when he's allowed to miss you, not when he's constantly reminded of you. Absence forces clarity. Silence forces reflection. When you step back calmly, his mind starts replaying your presence, your energy, your value. And that's when confusion either turns into certainty or fades into truth. Both outcomes protect you. This is also where self-respect shows up. If you believe distance automatically means you're not enough, you'll chase. But if you understand that distance can simply mean he's overwhelmed, you stay grounded, you don't disappear in anger, and you don't overextend in fear. You stay steady, and steady energy is attractive because it shows maturity, confidence, and emotional control. Remember this: someone who truly feels something for you will come back clearer after distance, not colder. And if he doesn't, then the distance wasn't confusion. Either way, your calm response saves you time, energy, and emotional damage. When you stop assuming the worst and start understanding the truth about how men process emotions, you stop losing yourself in situations that were never meant to break you. Let me explain something important, because this is where most people lose their power without even realizing it. When he starts distancing himself, the natural reaction is to move closer. You want answers, reassurance, clarity, and comfort. So you call, you text, you explain how you feel, and you try to hold the connection together. But what you don't see in that moment is that chasing doesn't create closeness. It creates pressure. And pressure is the fastest way to push a man further away. A man who is already unsure does not suddenly become certain because you pursue him harder. In his mind, every extra message feels like expectation. Every emotional conversation feels like responsibility. And when a man feels responsibility before he feels readiness, his instinct is to escape, not commit. That doesn't mean he's cruel. It means he's overwhelmed. And when someone is overwhelmed, the last thing they need is more weight on their shoulders. This is why space is not punishment, it's clarity. When you stop chasing, you remove the pressure. You allow him to sit with his thoughts instead of reacting to your emotions. You give him the chance to ask himself real questions. Do I miss her? Do I care? Do I feel different without her presence? Those questions only come when silence replaces pursuit. Here's the part most people don't want to accept. When you chase, you teach him that he doesn't have to show up consistently to keep access to you. You teach him that distance is safe because you'll close the gap for him. Over time, this creates imbalance. You become the one carrying the emotional weight while he stays comfortable in uncertainty. And the longer that pattern continues, the more your self-respect starts to erode. Choosing space is not about manipulation or playing games. It's about protecting your dignity. It's about saying without words, I value myself enough not to beg for attention. That message is powerful. It forces a man to either rise to the level of clarity or quietly step away, and both outcomes are healthy for you. When you stop chasing, something else happens inside you. You regain control of your emotions. You stop checking your phone constantly. You stop replaying conversations in your head. You stop tying your peace to someone else's behavior. And that shift changes your energy. Calm energy is magnetic. Desperate energy repels. If a man truly cares, space will pull him closer. He will feel the difference. He will notice the absence. He will reflect on what you brought into his life. But if he doesn't reach out, then the space didn't cost you anything real. It saved you from investing in someone who wasn't ready or willing to meet you where you stand. Understand this clearly. Love does not require pursuit to survive. Real interest moves forward on its own. When you choose space instead of chasing, you choose clarity over confusion and strength over fear. That decision, made in the moment he pulls away, determines whether you lose yourself or protect your worth. Let me tell you something that can change the whole dynamic of your life if you really hear it. The way you respond when someone distances himself is not just a reaction, it's a lesson. Every move you make is teaching him what is acceptable, what will be tolerated, and how much access he has to you. People don't treat you based on what you say you deserve. They treat you based on what you allow. When he pulls back and you immediately panic, over-explain, or try to prove your value, you're teaching him that inconsistency still gets rewarded. You're showing him that he can show up halfway and still receive full emotional access to you. That lesson sticks. Once someone learns that you'll adjust yourself to their lack of effort, they rarely feel the need to change. When you respond with calm, with boundaries, and with self-respect, you teach a very different lesson. You teach that access to you requires intention. You teach that confusion doesn't get comfort. You teach that distance is met with dignity, not desperation, and that lesson forces a choice. Either he steps up or he steps away. Most people don't realize how powerful silence can be when it's rooted in self-worth. Silence doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough about yourself not to chase clarity from someone who should already be clear. When you don't rush to fix the situation, you create space for him to feel the weight of his actions. You allow consequences to exist without drama. Here's the truth. If you always explain yourself, people learn not to listen the first time. If you always forgive inconsistency, people learn not to be consistent. And if you always stay when you're being undervalued, people learn that you'll accept less than you deserve. Your response becomes the standard. Choosing a strong response doesn't mean being cold or cruel. It means being intentional. It means you don't argue with behavior. You observe it. You don't demand effort, you notice whether it's freely given. And you don't threaten to leave, you simply stop overextending when respect is missing. When you respond from self-respect, something shifts inside you as well. You stop trying to control outcomes. You stop trying to manage someone else's emotions. You realize that the right person won't need to be trained on how to treat you. They'll naturally align with your standards. And let me say this clearly. If someone distances himself and your healthy response pushes him further away, that's not a loss. That's information. It tells you he was only comfortable when you were over-giving, over-available, and over-compromising. The moment you stood firm, the connection couldn't survive. That's not love, that's convenience. Your response is your power. Use it wisely. Because every time you choose dignity over desperation, you're not just teaching him a lesson, you're reinforcing your own worth. And the people who are meant to stay will always rise to the level you set, not the level you beg for. Let me share something that often gets overlooked, but it matters more than anything else in moments like this. When he starts distancing himself, one of the most important things you can do is learn how to use silence with purpose. Silence is not weakness. Silence is not giving up. Silence, when grounded in self-respect, is strength. Most people misunderstand silence because they associate it with fear, punishment, or manipulation. But real silence is simply